And Jeff, if you see hands raised that Steve and I missed during the presentation, feel free to jump in if you would.
Absolutely.
I don't want to steal Gene's thunder as host, but I do want to make sure we get started. So I may have no choice. I'll wear both hats. So hi, Corb O'Connor. I'm on the board of the National Organization of Parents of Blind Children, and glad that you're able to join us. Want to let you know that our session today is being recorded. So if you don't wish to be recorded, either stay muted or we'll do our best to make the session recording available. I'm not quite sure how or if we're going to be able to do that, but we certainly will do our best. Steve, I hope it's all right with you. I didn't check with you ahead of time, but if folks would love to have your questions along the way, drop them in the chat, raise your hand. If you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand, or Alt-Y on the computer, or in the participants panel of the phone app's bottom left corner above the invite button is a raise hand. So without further ado, maybe Steve, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself?
Sure. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
All right. So I am Steve Decker. I'm a lead accessibility consultant for Target.com. I live in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. I've got 3 kids and my wife. My kids are 8, 5, and 2, so quite busy with that. And we just added a new puppy to the mix. Yeah, I've been blind my entire life, born and raised in Iowa. And before coming to Target, I worked at Blind Incorporated, among other places, one of our NFB training centers.
Great. And so Corb O'Connor, I'll switch hats. I am an accessibility testing operations manager at Site Improve. So I work on digital accessibility, just like Steve, though different side of town, different company. But have been, this is I think my 14th convention. So it's been a long time here, and certainly being raised as a blind kid, I had a lot of great opportunities, but learning Braille and was not one of them. Great skills in cane travel. I had a lot of exposure with, getting out into the work world and self-advocacy. And I think that's what we really want to touch on today is how some of these first jobs that we held, and I'll look forward to Steve telling you a little about his in just a moment, really helped us. And I want to make sure that we're answering your questions as well. And we want to be mindful that a lot of you may be wondering how to get your kiddos, well, I don't know if I can call them kiddos if they're looking at summer jobs, but how to get your family involved in summer employment, and maybe some ways that you as a parent can support them without doing it for them, and maybe some ways that you can also push them toward opportunities, given that we know that the accessibility of so much of what people do in the work world is not quite where we want it to be. But I think there's some neat opportunities that we have to overcome that. Steve, do you want to maybe give us a quick, well, not quick, but do you want to take a few minutes and give us a sense of your first summer jobs and what that was like for you?
Sure. So my first summer job, main summer job, was working actually 35 hours a week in the cafeteria of a meatpacking plant. It was through a work experience program for blind kids, teenagers, set up by the state of Iowa. And my experience was maybe a little unique in that we actually lived in a college dorm setting for 6 weeks, which is way cooler than most people's first jobs. But I had to, I took paratransit to get to the meatpacking plant, had to figure my way through the meatpacking plant. About 1,500 people worked there at any one time, and to the cafeteria. There were like 80 school lunchroom tables, just a huge cafeteria. I had a job coach for a very short amount of time when I started, who helped me in certain ways figure out how to do certain things, like serving French fries on a food line, but also helped me when I wasn't always quite forceful enough or capable enough at advocating for myself with other staff who may have wanted to, just do things for me, or thinking things are dangerous, or not always have the highest expectations. So for me, though, I mean, my first job, I bussed tables, I did dishes, a little bit of food prep and things like that as well. And it wasn't perfect, but for instance, I would advocate, I think, for myself a lot more now, knowing what I know now as an older adult. But it was really great to have money to spend as I chose to spend it. That was really empowering, especially because you don't always get that as much as you get older as an adult when you have more obligations. I think that's one of the biggest benefits. There's just a huge sense of empowerment also, though, at getting to work, doing a job, having people tell you that you're making them look bad because you're cleaning the tables too well. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a bit of my a bit about my job. I can go into more detail, but it's kind of that in an overview. I will say it gave me a lot of kind of opened my eyes to the experiences of others. There were a lot of people who were lower income, maybe from a different social class, and didn't have the privileges that I did, actually, even as a blind kid. And so I'm just glad to have that opportunity, to see how what life is like for other people. I think a lot of people get that in their first summer jobs. And I guess the final thing I would say before moving on is that it taught me a lot of hard skills, like navigating, big open areas while pulling a trash cart. Things that may not seem relevant if you're not a janitor, but if you ever clean up after a potluck at work or want to be seen as able to contribute to something in the work, in your community organizations, churches, whatever, having some of those skills is really important. And I think even having skills to start at an entry-level job is really important. I've taught blind people for years before working at Target, and people have goals and dreams. They want to be lawyers or teachers or whatever, and that's really great. But everybody does have to start somewhere, climbing the ladder of success, so to speak. It's really hard to get someone to lift you, several rungs up. Usually you have to start climbing the ladder at the bottom, and having skills to do that, having skills to do the dirty jobs or the jobs that are less desirable, because you're the entry level, maybe the intern or the most junior employee, I think is really valuable.
Guys, we actually do have a hand raise. It's one of the callers. Their last digit is 8876 if you guys want to take the question.
Hi, this is Chris Jones. I'm in Cedro-Woolley, Washington. I'm an old guy. I'm 67. Been blind all my life. I basically wanted to be on your session because I think the idea of this is so valuable. I went to high school. I am white by whatever you want to call it, ethnicity, and I integrated a high school in Winter Park, Florida, near Orlando. I was the first blind kid to graduate from there in June of 1970, so I've been down that road for a bit.
Great. And what's your question?
Well, it's not really a question as much as it's an observation. My first job was as a can't even think what it was. It was like I worked at a film processing place in Orlando, processing camera film. And my parents lived in Winter Park, so my dad basically took me back and forth from work to home, is kind of how that was. And so I just learned to splice stuff. He saw an ad or something about this company, and as it turned out, a girl that I had known from having been at the Florida School for the Blind a while ago was working there full time. And so I did that as a summer job initially. And so, it wasn't hard work. It wasn't real difficult. It was kind of like my blindness was almost an advantage in that particular situation. I moved on to actually become a darkroom tech for a while at a hospital, and then actually for quite a while played piano at a larger hotel restaurant in Cheyenne, Wyoming for several months, and moved on and did some other more professional stuff. I got a degree in social work, and actually my last job that I retired from was I worked as a student disability specialist at Clover Park Technical College in Lakewood near Tacoma, Washington. And so I did that. But
well, I'm glad you joined us today. Thanks for calling in.
I just wanted to share and
being part
connect.
Of it. I appreciate it. I think one of the things, Steve, that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was the idea that some of your other coworkers were making this point that you were cleaning tables better than them, and I wonder to what do you attribute that?
I think it was it's possible that some of it's just amazement that a blind person could clean tables. I was a little bored because especially after things weren't that busy, I literally had nothing else to do. And so it kind of focuses the mind a little bit to work in a grid pattern from table to table. But I certainly think that being a Braille reader since the age of 3 really honed my tactile sense at feeling dirt on the tables. And so I did probably clean them very well. Yeah, that's what I would think.
That's interesting. I've noticed that as we've had we've gone in to have other people sometimes, give our house a clean, and the first thing that Briley and I will do is go touch the counters and go, nope, not done yet.
Right, exactly.
But I'm sure to a sighted person, it's perfectly fine. I think too, when you mentioned, some of the work that you were doing, were you looking, Steve, for a job that you knew as a blind person you could do, or was that just a job that kind of anybody from your school or class might have jumped into?
No, that was really a job anybody might have jumped into. And I at the time was actually interested in working in radio before I realized that I wanted to have a roof over my head. But I did just want money. My older sister, a couple years older, was working at a kitchen of a nursing home a couple years before I started working, and so I wanted that same sort of independence that having a little spending money gives you, being able to save for things. Of course, we didn't have cell phones back then really very much, but things like that. That's what I really wanted. And I think even, I probably worked hard to demonstrate my worth to my coworkers. Makes
sense. And I think that's kind of the story of how I got into my first job as well. So my very first job was at a movie theater, and I don't really know why I picked a movie theater as somewhere I wanted to work at first, but it sounded like a fun place to be. And so, a couple of the things that I remember about that experience, from the interview side of things, I came into it probably very differently than I would suggest other people come into it. But I really opened the door for the person that was interviewing me to be like, do you have any concerns about blindness, right? I wouldn't ask that question today, knowing what I know, but I think being willing to answer those questions and those concerns and assuage those concerns, whether it's through your actions or through your words, is a really important first step in that. And so, one of the things that we talked about then was the big concern as working a box office of a movie theater was checking IDs for people under 17 watching R-rated movies. And now being double that age and looking back, I go, man, was that really that big of a deal? But to the company it was. And so there were some very awkward moments where I carded a 42-year-old at one point. And he's like, oh, do you need to see my ID for my credit card? I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is. So But I think, the other piece of that now, as I think back, is that, I was somebody who had grown up with this idea of using my remaining vision to get work done. And so for me, right, full disclosure, working the box office was something that was pretty draining on my eyes. But as I got more experience with that manager and with that organization, I realized this is really not as great as it seemed like it could be. And so instead of saying, hey, I don't think this job is going to work for me, instead of trying to figure out, right, I didn't know JAWS, I didn't know a lot of computer, but what I did know is that there was a lot of work to do at the concession stand that was a lot more exciting than standing in one place for 8 hours a day. And so, it was learning, okay, all the candy is always going to be in the same spot. So maybe I'm not working the cash register, but somebody can call out what they need and I can get it. The drinks, they don't move, right? The cups don't move. The hot dogs that really do sit there for hours at a time, they don't really move positions much. But it was some interesting times too of, realizing that learning how to make popcorn, you really don't want to know what's in there. But doing that at the same time for me was an experience in kind of getting, to Steve's point, getting my hands dirty and getting in there to find out from what customer service is really all about. We had a family at one point come up and say, hey, my kid needs a soda. She's got diabetes. I really need to get her some sugar. And my coworkers were saying, oh, okay, that'll be $3.21. And, she's like, I don't have time. I need to get her something. And, the first thing that occurred to me was, you know what? I'm sure we can figure out how to say that we needed to give a cup of soda away. Right. And so having the opportunity to, when all my coworkers and even the lead at the time were saying, oh no, we can't possibly do that, going, you know what, I know what accommodations are like for me as a blind person, and I know what it's like to share those with people who need them. It's about finding ways to do those jobs that may not be like everybody else is doing them, but showing some ways that you can provide that same value.
Absolutely.
And Corbin, Steve, this is Beth. I just wanted to let you know that I am here. I kind of got mixed up with the times, whether it was Eastern or Central, et cetera.
Oh,
but
not a problem. Glad you're here, Beth. A fellow Minnesotan.
Exactly.
On one panel. Not sure what's going to happen. Well, Beth, do you want to give us a quick synopsis of maybe who you are and what you're doing professionally now, and then also a little about your first job?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Beth McGarr. I currently live in Minnesota. I grew up in Wisconsin and spent some time in Denver as well. Currently, I work as a teacher of the blind and visually impaired, serving students in Minnesota in several districts. I think someone needs to mute their microphone. So, and in terms of professionally, I have a master's in vocal performance. So I spent some time doing music work. And then after that, I went back to school and got a second master's to become a teacher of the blind and visually impaired. I spent some time singing and working, singing professionally with choirs, giving private lessons. And now I do teaching blind students as my job. However, my first job, I was a strolling opera singer at a macaroni grill. And it was a wonderful experience. I couldn't have asked for a better job experience, from just the overall interview experience itself to getting the job, getting accommodations for that job, and then, performing the duties that I'd been hired for. I don't know, how much detail, but, I went through the interview process. I turned in my application, in person. They called me back for an interview and an audition, and then I was hired to perform the duties of strolling around and singing at different tables. Sorry, I'll back up. As I continued as I continued with the job, I also took on other duties of a hostess. And so I would seat customers and bring them their menus. I would take to-go orders over the phone. I would kind of help the servers keep people I would help the servers when they were busy, kind of keep customers occupied and entertained. And when we'd have big parties, I would help them like arrange the restaurant and work on making sure that we had, you know, the right parties for the right tables, et cetera. So that was kind of the overview of what I did and what I'm doing now.
Great. We have somebody with their hand up, B. Silver.
Okay, hello. You guys there?
Yes.
Hello,
Okay.
Silver.
Hey, actually, my name is Brett. I just want to let you guys know one big takeaway, and this is for parents. I know some people were asking some questions in the chat. You know, there's nothing wrong with volunteering. That's how I got my first job. And unfortunately, you have to prove yourself in a lot of cases to these employers. That's just the hardcore truth to this. And so, yeah, I think volunteering is important, even though you're not getting paid. You know, a lot of people saying, well, you know, I'm not getting paid. What's the point of doing that? Well, eventually, you know, the employer may hire you, but I'd say volunteering is pretty vital.
You know, I agree with you, Brett, and I would be curious, Steve and Beth, for your thoughts on this. But I think what occurs to me is that volunteering is certainly a very good thing to do, and it's a great way to get involved, to meet new people, to get experience. But I think there's a lot of things that can carry over in terms of transferable skills. But I think when I'm thinking about first jobs, I'm thinking of somebody who's in the 14, 15, 16-year-old range and really getting them experience in a work setting where, you know, sometimes as a volunteer, even a regular volunteer, your boss is less likely to come down hard on you for not doing something because they recognize you're free and they really don't want to upset you too much because they're going to lose that free labor. And I think when you're working for somebody, they're a lot more likely to really call you out on what you're doing that is not, maybe not as what they want to be doing, not the right image to be sending, a better way to have handled a situation. You know, when somebody, for example, does complain, right, bring that forward to the person who is the employee. Beth or Steve, did you have any experiences similar to that with your first managers?
No. I had a few different managers actually at my first job, and they were pretty good. There was a blind person though the summer before I worked this program, who had a lot of other cognitive disabilities on top of blindness, and I was judged a lot, I think, based on his expectations at first, and his abilities, and you know, honestly, that's been kind of a growth opportunity, as we say in the corporate world, I guess, for me to think about though, like how, you know, hierarchy of disability within blindness, how we treat and judge people with other disabilities on top of blindness. I would hope that I am more patient now than I was then when I was kind of being judged by lower expectations. Certainly from some of the managers, I think there was, you know, more concerns about safety and, you know, not seeing that I was independent and capable.
Yeah, and I think you've segued nicely to another question we had over here in the chat that I saw about handling discrimination from in the interview process, and maybe some ways that parents can support their students in that endeavor. And I think one idea that comes to mind, at least for me on that, is that sometimes when we think of mock interviews that we do with a career center, with a job coach, we are thinking about the questions that, you know, tell me about an experience when, or what would you do in this situation, or, you know, what is your best strength, those kinds of questions. And I think we also need to make sure that we mix in there, how will someone respond to the question that maybe is out of bounds from a legal perspective? And I think everybody has to answer that themselves, right? So the legal answer is, the only question that an employer can ask you is, how would you do this job with or without an accommodation? So you could, for example, say, well, with your box office software, right, I use a computer by using the keyboard and listening to audio output while I'm also talking to someone. I identify currency by using an iBill reader. If you go visit the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in the exhibit hall for more info. So, those are, or through an iPhone app. But what can't be is, right, how would you as a blind person possibly do this job? Very broad brushstrokes. But I think it might also be, depending on how that situation's going, right, it may be the kind of thing where you can just answer the question that you wish they'd asked. You might also find a way to say, well, legally, I know this is what we can talk about here. So let me answer that question for you. It may also behoove you to just give them that answer of, yeah, I'm blind, and here's how I do my life. Let's move on, and kind of assuage their concerns that way. Beth, Steve, anything you'd add?
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
With that first job, I really didn't have any issues about accommodations or services. I think my manager set the bar really high for what, I should be able to expect from an employer. I've had other ones, in the future, or I guess beyond that job, who were not as accommodating. I had one employer ask me, what am I supposed to tell parents of students that you're about your blindness and that you're blind? And I'm like, that I'm blind, and that we'll work it out. And I can certainly talk to them directly, but I don't need you to be telling them anything in particular. And that one, I ended up, for a number of reasons, taking complaining to the EEOC about it. And then, having discussions of, discrimination based on my blindness. But just in terms of, that first job, I was I was very lucky.
So for me, I think having a job coach was helpful in helping me come up with techniques that I hadn't thought about. And I don't really like that because she was a sighted job coach and, sort of saw it as her mission to, teach blind people how to do these sorts of jobs. But I do think that as blind adults who are more advanced in our careers, we always depend on a network of blind people for techniques when we don't know, when we need some ideas and inspiration on how we might do something. And I think it's crucial that kids have, maybe mentors. There are blind vendors, blind people who are chefs, blind people who've, organized picnics or, large food events, home management instructors, right? Blind kids, teenagers starting out with their first jobs need to know that they have someone they can ask. Hey, they want me to try, serving French fries on a hot line of food tomorrow. How do I not accidentally stick the tongs in the chili next to it? What techniques did you use? Sometimes people in the kitchen teaching me things didn't always know how to teach them very well. And so they would, of course, depend on the job coach, which was not so desirable. But I think that people starting out with their first jobs need to know how to ask for the help they need, getting people to teach them things more verbally, more, hands-on sometimes. And then, knowing they have that network of blind people.
And I wonder too, oh, sorry, Steve.
I was going to say, obviously, the National Federation of the Blind, but I think even more specifically in a lot of cases, you literally should have a person who has done something very similar to the job that you're doing that you could, text or call or something.
I completely agree.
I wonder, Steve, if that one idea that came to mind is for parents that may be in that situation, right? So they have a son or daughter who's going to be moving toward, employment, and maybe it's you find that thing in the house that you haven't bothered to teach your kid because not because you haven't thought they could do it, but you just didn't ever teach them that skill. So for me, it was laundry, right? I didn't really learn how to do laundry until I was 18, and my mom goes, well, it's really quite simple. Not so simple when I was going off to college and saw a machine with 17 dials on it. And mom saying, don't worry, when you go to college, you won't have a machine nearly this nice. There'll only be 2 switches.
Right.
But still, right?
And
It's
then,
the kind of thing where
they're all digital.
that's right. Yeah, now they're
Right.
totally different. There's no such, what's a button? But I think it might be the kind of thing where as a parent, you say, you know what, let's pretend that I'm going to teach you how to light a candle. Let's pretend that I'm going to teach you how to deep fry potatoes, whatever it is. And you are going to be the most unhelpful teacher that you've ever been. And you teach like you're teaching a sighted person. Oh, I grab this and I do that. And over here, you see when it does right. And you have, and prepare your kiddo for this ahead of time, but you say, ask questions, right? And get them used to going, what's this? I can't see what this is. You're saying shake a little bit. Can I see how much you've put in? Those kinds of techniques, may be a way that we can start with, students as early as 10, 12, maybe even earlier, and getting them to ask the questions about what they need. Yeah, Beth.
And then too, I think another idea is to turn that around. After they get practice knowing what they need, then give them the opportunity to teach you. Say, hey, let's have you teach me how to do this, and I'll do it like you need to do it, so that way they can feel confident in that skill, and confident in showing you that they know how to do it, and showing themselves they know how to do it too.
Yeah,
I agree, and I think so. You mentioned laundry, Corb. My mom truly has a deep enjoyment of doing laundry. It's kind of strange, and she taught me how to do laundry. I do appreciate that. So does my wife. But I think it's also important to know your limits as a teacher, and to know when you maybe haven't thought of a good technique. Having kids of my own now, I know they don't always want to learn from me, and so it can really help to have that sort of mentoring relationship with other blind folks when you've kind of reached the limits of your teaching, or you just can't think of how something might be done. In fact, at my job, when I was working in the cafeteria, I met a chemistry student at the local college, the dorm I was staying at. He was just 4 or 5 years older, working as a plant chemist, and he was kind of one of the first people who actually saw that I had a lot more potential than just wiping down tables, and kind of took me under his wing. I ended up going to that college when I graduated high school, and it was a really great kind of social network sort of thing, pre-Facebook. But having those relationships come out of summer jobs and high school jobs is really important for everybody, and blind kids really need that too. And so kind of just along the lines of mentoring, so to speak.
Guys, we do have a couple of hands raised if you want to get to those.
Yeah, let's do that.
Jelena, I believe you've had your hand raised for a little bit. I just unmuted you. Jelena's iPhone.
Hi, everybody. Can you
Hello.
hear me?
Hi, Jelena.
Yes.
What's your question?
Hi, Jelena.
Oh, hi. So I'm actually a teenager. And I had a few questions. I had one question for Beth. Because I was very interested in music and opera, and I went to the School for the Arts here in my city in Santa Fe. And
Wonderful.
yeah, so I was wondering just like what exactly it took, and like if you got like Braille music, and like how that worked.
Well, that sounds like that might be something that we can follow up on afterwards, and we can maybe take some questions about first jobs at least here.
Yeah, and then
if that
yeah,
would work.
Absolutely.
and then I had one other question about like a first job. So I had an experience where I was working at a vet, and I worked with another person who definitely had some, I think he had Asperger's or something, and so they'd always kind of categorize us into the same group. And so they'd be like, oh, well, like I heard somebody be like, well, you should just give her very simple tasks, like I don't know, like putting a lid on medicine bottles, and like, okay, I understand that that's what they wanted me to do, but I felt very like discriminated against. And also, like, I'm also African American and female, and I have a Jewish last name, so I mean, and so I, like, in that case, I feel like I wasn't really sure exactly what to say, because, or like I had labeled the washing machine and somebody took the labels off of the washing machine, and I'm pretty sure I knew who it was, but I didn't. So I don't know, in those types of situations, it's kind of hard. And then even the center that I was at, they left me at my job on accident. So I felt like I couldn't even go to them to ask for any help.
What I'm hearing from you, Jelena, is that there have been some situations that have been discriminatory, but probably just enough under the surface that it's been hard
Yeah.
to like
Let's,
call them out
yeah,
or address them.
right.
Yeah. And so, Steve, do you have any thoughts on how to handle those kind of, I dare say, passive aggressive
Yeah.
microaggressions, that sort of thing?
I think first it's really helpful to have someone to talk to about things like that, to know, kind of help you figure out if it was discrimination and how you should address it. Because if someone has, I should say, when someone has lower expectations of us, sometimes we can educate past that. Sometimes we can, just keep showing them that we can do something, or, we can volunteer, we can step up. But sometimes there are times when you need to talk to a supervisor. That can be really tough if you have, not a great relationship, or if the supervisor is doing the discriminating. And it can honestly be a little tricky with summer jobs or temporary jobs like that. But I also think the one thing to keep in mind is that you should feel free to push back against discrimination, to stand up for yourself, and know that summer jobs, short-term jobs, don't last forever. And so it's such a great place to try and to
Yeah.
learn, to make mistakes. And maybe if you push too hard, and offend people, you won't have that job forever. And if you stand up for yourself and the discrimination stops, then what a great learning moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially
I
for the
mean, it
people that are
was
coming behind you. So thanks for the
right.
question, Jelena. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
problem.
I would
Yeah,
also
thank you.
add too that I agree with Steve about going to a supervisor and just explaining to them, about high expectations, about the expectations that you have for yourself and about the ones that other people should have for you, and offer to talk to other staff members about or to just to say to them, let me show you what I can do. It's not always easy, because you want them to just automatically say, I can, you can do everything that I can do. But sometimes people need to be shown and educated, and it's really tough.
Well, I feel like the labeling thing was purposefully so I couldn't do it, because I had done a successful load of laundry with the label on, and then somebody was just like, oh, well,
Great.
you can't do that anymore because I took the label off.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of thing, Jelena, where you could even say, and maybe it's, exactly who it is, but you say, I'd like to get a group together to discuss this, because I think we have an opportunity here. And you say, hey, just as if I went over there and scrubbed off all the print, that's the equivalent of taking these off. And it may not be the most beautiful label, but that's because the person who made this machine didn't think about the needs of someone who can't see it. So you know what, here's why these are there, here's why they're necessary, and see
Yep.
where that goes. But I appreciate, Steve, where you're coming from too, that I think it's important to remember that these are jobs, and they are just as protected of employment as a full-time job that you might get after graduating with a master's degree. So they're no different just because they're these entry-level positions. And in some ways, I dare say, they're even more important because of they're such the gate to a lot of jobs down the road. Gene, did we have more hands up or questions?
Yeah, we do have. We have Briley. Your hand has been up for a while. Let me unmute you as well. Briley O'Connor.
Yep. Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask a quick question about how can parents, what would be helpful from a parent when their teenager is applying for jobs and they experience discrimination in the hiring process? Because we know that it happens. And we often, even if it's not super specific, maybe there's just no call back about a job. Maybe their friend gets the job instead of them. But, you know, we all know that if they could see, they probably would have gotten it too. So what's a way to be affirming of that experience without dismissing that happens? Because I think sometimes the instinct is to go, well, we don't really know that that's why you didn't get it, when most likely that is. So we don't want to be dismissive, but we also don't want to be defeatist either. So what are some good techniques that parents can use?
I wonder if each of us could maybe take 30 seconds and answer that question, and maybe we can fit in, Jeff and Jean, maybe we can fit in one more question after this. You know, I think the first thought that comes to mind for me, and I appreciate what you're saying about you don't want you want to acknowledge the experience, but you also want to push your kiddo to push back. And, you know, one thing that is out there and as a possibility is to go meet with that, or ask to meet, or, you know, walk up to that manager if it's a retail store and say, hey, I had applied for this position and I didn't hear from you, or I know that, you know, you found someone already, but what is this, you know, what is the reason that what can I do differently next time to get this position? So you're asking basically for interview feedback. And in that experience, you may find out that it was direct discrimination. Great, we can go down a different road. You may find out that it was a misunderstanding or confusion, and it's something that you can do differently in the interview next time. And maybe it's a mix of both. But it's a way of putting your student back in the driver's seat to say, you know what, let's go find out what's really going on, or at least what we can learn about directly as going on, and use that in future interviews and conversations. Beth, Steve, do you have maybe a quick thought on that, and we can try to get to one more question?
Go ahead, Beth.
Well, I would say that I agree with you, Corb, about reaching out to the manager or whomever you applied for the job with via email, going to them directly. I also think it's a great opportunity to educate a child about, you know, discrimination and the laws surrounding it, and you know, kind of their options, you know, or not necessarily their options, but just knowing about, you know, what their choices are based on the situation that they're faced with. But just in general, I think that, you know, encouraging them to communicate, you know, finding out exactly why they didn't get the job, or if they're, you know, encouraging them to ask questions. Well, are there more questions that I can answer for you to, you know, about who I am and, you know, how I can do things, or even saying, you know, ask the person who you applied to the job for what I can do to improve my application for the next job that I apply for. Would be another idea.
I agree with all that. And I think it's also important to know that it can be so hard to get a job when you have never had a job. And so sighted people work their friends, they work parents' connections, family connections, and you should absolutely use those, you know, sometimes even start with those, because, you know, we all have to do what we have to do to find a job, especially that first job. And if there's any way that you can, you know, use your networking skills to secure that first opportunity to at least prove yourself and start proving yourself, I would not feel bad about using that at all, you know, and even your fellow blind friends.
That's a great point. And I think we're over time, and I think we may need to let our Zoom host go to the next meeting to start on time. But I'll throw out there that I'm pretty much the only Corb you'll find, the only one in the NFB, and the only one you'll find in most social networks. So feel free to drop me a note through the Crowd Compass app, the attendee hub, or I'm sure you can find me anywhere. And I would love to connect with you and answer any more of your questions. And if you want to get in touch with our panelists, feel free to shoot an email, info@nopbc.org, and we'll make sure to get you in touch.
Yes, I was going to say, because I don't think I'm on that app, and I haven't been as involved with the organization as in previous years, but I know that I can be reached through any of the hosts here, Corb, Steve, Melissa,
Great.
Riccobono, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for everyone for joining, and thanks Jeff and Jean for moderating us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.